It's Mark and Pete.
Welcome to the show, more colourful conversations with Mark and Pete. This is the show dedicated to religion, politics and business. On today's programme, we'll be asking the question, what does it take to be a great leader? Well, here we are, reflecting upon the UK general election results, and it's been quite surprising. In fact, there have been many issues around leadership, and this particular election has focused quite a lot on the main leaders. But what does it take to be a great leader? You know, there are many things which is reliant upon being a good communicator, having a good strategy, having honesty and trust. Now, as we've seen, David Cameron is now the Prime Minister once again. But I'm going to sort of set up the conversation with just a little brief poem. And this poem is called Desperate. A single result can catapult an ailing Conservative leader. But now the election's done, David Cameron has truly won, despite being a desperate pleader. Well, of course, we're not going to just talk about politics. We're going to talk about business. And there are many other things that we can consider when it comes to being a great leader. So with me today is Pete. So, Pete, what in your opinion makes a great leader?
Well, the thing about a leader is, first and foremost, the thing about a leader is they've got to have followers. And so you can't be a leader if you're just going your own way and no one can catch up with you because you're so quickly going in a new direction or because you're traveling too quickly and changing things too quickly. So first of all, you've got to have followers. And that means something about your personality. People have got to want to follow you, and there can be various ways that can be achieved. So, you know, that can be a wide, different panoply of different character types can be great leaders, but they do need to inspire people to follow them, however they do it, however their particular personality does it. But the other feature of a really great leader is that they have to be able to be confident enough, yes, to lead, but also humble enough to be able to be obedient to someone who's actually in authority over them, or obedient to the facts. In other words, being realistic as to where they can go, responding to events in a realistic way, so that even though they had a great vision to do something, whatever it is, they will change that and not just be arrogant to think, yes, I can push through and lead their followers down a dead end. So there's two different sides to what makes a leader. One, they need to be able to lead, inspire people to follow them. People want to follow them. But secondly, they need to be humble enough to be able to respond to circumstances and to people who are in authority over them in an appropriate manner. There's a verse in the Bible that I was looking at earlier today when I was recording my daily devotional preaching podcast episode, and it's from 1 Samuel chapter 8. In verse 5, Samuel, who was the great prophet and leader of Israel, was told by the people of Israel, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." So he was told, "You're too old, and we don't like your kids either." So he was thoroughly rejected, and yet God told him that he had to go on being a prophet. He was replaced as leader by a king, rather, and yet he was told that he had to go on and function, obeying what God said, as a prophet. So he had to swallow his pride, react to the situation, remain a good leader by allowing someone to be a leader above him. So he had to respond in humility. So this way of being a leader, commanded by God in this case, was to lead, to have them following him, but then to respond to the situation when they wouldn't follow him he would appoint someone else to do it. And that shows great leadership, to be so concerned for the followers and so realistic and humble in responding to different events and someone in authority over him, in this case God, that he would even give up his leadership role. Which I mention that because that example particularly because that fits in with the idea of being an elected leader, doesn't it? That if the electorate votes you out, you can still behave as a leader by responding with a bit of class.
Yes. Well, with that in mind, of course, during the general election in the United Kingdom, of course, we had many leaders contesting the leadership. And, of course, what we have seen, remarkably, are many leaders who have had to show a bit of humility and eat a bit of humble pie. I mean, notably, Ed Miliband, who resigned as the Labour Party leader. Of course, he didn't stop there. Of course, we had Nick Clegg, who also resigned from the Liberal Democrats. And there were many other leaders, which included Nigel Farage. So quite a number of leaders have actually sort of basically bow down to the fact that the people have spoken. But of course, it isn't just about politics. Of course, there are many great leaders, as it has often been described, who have actually truly really commanded the epithet of the Great. So, for example, like Alfred the Great, King Alfred the Great, what is often seen as hailed as the father of England, who proved his greatness back in the second half of the 9th century. Now, this was when Viking hordes were swarming all over the country. And, of course, at the time, Alfred, the King of Wessex, as it was known in England, devoted much of his time to battling these Danish invaders. So, in order to sort of establish like a naval force and an army to fight off competition. So to be a true great, and I think there's a big difference in this question that we've got. Being a leader is one thing, but what makes a great leader, in your opinion?
Yes. Well, yes, that's what I was hinting at that earlier. I talked about great leadership in that it's taking it to the next level. You can be a leader if you have followers. You can be a leader if you can see the right direction to go and people will follow you. But what makes a great leader seems to be that extra level, that humility to respond to people in authority or to situations and to respond to it appropriately. Now, Alfred the Great, of course, went through a great reverse in which he was on the run. And the story told of him, whether or not it actually happened, of him while he's on the run staying in a woman's humble home and eating the cakes or bread that she was cooking, and yet just sitting there, not actually turning them over at the appropriate time so they burn. And she tells him off, and he takes it because he responds to her authority in that situation. He's humble, and this immediately, it doesn't need to explain. When you hear that story, the story of Alfred the Great burning the cakes has made its way into British folklore, because we see that means he's a great leader, that he's not simply arrogant, he's confident, but recognizes when someone has a specific authority. He is humble enough to respond in that way, and of course, after his time there, he went on to win a great victory. And that willingness to humble themselves makes leaders great. And it seems to me that all the great leaders that we've seen, certainly in terms of leading the country, seem to have gone through times where they've had to just hunker down, or they've had to deal with a great reversal. I think specifically of Winston Churchill, who's known as a great leader, great Prime Minister of Britain. And you were talking of those leaders who were vying for the post of Prime Minister. And that's the same position that he held. Winston Churchill held the post of Prime Minister during the Second World War, and seen as overall being a great leader and a great success. He had to take very difficult decisions. Some were right, some were wrong and disastrous, but he did take them.
Yes.
And this ability to take decisions, to show leadership, to make mistakes, but still go on behaving as a leader, even though you've made those mistakes, makes you a great leader. Winston Churchill himself went through a great reversal in his career, but carried on going.
We're taking a leaf
that's an aspect of what makes a great leader, at any rate.
Well, I mean, taking a leaf out of King Alfred's, because Churchill certainly got his fingers burned, because he was a leader in many forms, certainly in British politics, holding many high roles, and at one point was literally in the political wilderness after holding many high positions after the First World War. But of course, as we say, we do tend to recognise Churchill as being great because he managed to overcome adversity, not just from a personal point of view, but from a national point of view. Often seen sometimes where there's similarities in sort of strength of character, like Margaret Thatcher, who perhaps was seen as being a bit headstrong and bullish, but very decisive. So again, being a great leader is, as you say, you have to take key decisions. May not be popular, but at least they are seen today as being great leaders for all those different attributes. So, I mean, I suppose the question is there anyone today that really stands out as being a truly great leader? So, for example, would you say that our Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, would you think he's a great leader? Or do you think Barack Obama as a presidential leader? Or how would you see great leaders that are operating today?
Well, here's my problem with commenting on those examples or other people who are still in position of leadership. It's too soon to say. It only seems to be in retrospect that you can say that someone was a great leader. Going back to Winston Churchill, people at the time thought he was a bit of a charlatan. He crossed the floor of the House, so changed parties twice. So you see someone who was a bit opportunistic. And it's only in retrospect we see, no, that there was greatness in that leadership. And so it's difficult to make the decisions. But you can say that someone like, let's take Barack Obama, so President of the United States, he has, in his leadership, done things that we at Mark and Pete, and when I've commented on other broadcast episodes of different podcasts, I've been very critical of the decisions and his policies. But yet, I do think he shows himself as a leader, because he has got people to follow him. He's made brave decisions. The fact that I disagree with those decisions doesn't take away from the fact that he's showing leadership qualities. I think the two are distinct. So I would say that Barack Obama may well be looked upon when we look back on his time in office as having been a leader of some note. The problem is, in the end, we still judge people on whether they were right.
Yes.
It does come out. So now you were talking about the current Archbishop of Canterbury. Now it's worth talking about him because he, even more so than someone like the President of the United States, apparently has great power and authority over, in this case, the Church of England. But in fact, really what he has is influence.
Yes.
He's given this role, which is largely as a figurehead, because within the Church of England, the power has shifted. It was always a lot of power was given to the local church leaders. But then they brought, in the early 20th century, they brought in a democratic element to it, and that there's a synod, a joining together of all the different leaders, where they discuss and vote on major decisions. And although technically he could disagree with them and not implement them, in practice, that's proved, they've a big decision made by synod, the Archbishop of Canterbury will go with it. And so it's a difficult leadership role because you don't have freedom simply to make decisions on advice. You are driven to simply using your influence. However, I would say he shows leadership qualities in that he isn't pushed around by circumstances. He responds calmly and well, even though he has been criticised by the different wings in the church. He's been criticised pretty evenly by the different wings. So I would say, yes, he does show that certain I suppose I would call it steeliness of character, and without being overly harsh and bullying, which shows that he could well be looked back as having been a great leader. But
Yes.
as I say, it's just too early to tell when you've got a current leader. The most we can do is look at elements of their character or leadership style and say, is that something that could make them a great leader?
Well, I would also bring up two leaders that are well known, certainly in recent times. One recently died, and one is still very much in power. So if you look over recent times, you can say that somebody like a leader like Vladimir Putin, now, he is a leader today. And he is seen, ironically, from international quarters as not being a great leader, somebody who's very difficult to deal with, somebody who actually is potentially a major threat. But yet in country, even though the Russian economy is not great, and even though they have some challenges, is still seen as actually a very good leader. In fact, even seen as great, the term great leader, a strong leader, a powerful leader. And then I'll turn to somebody who recently died, which is Nelson Mandela. During his lifetime, so this is the emphasis to sort of contradict a little bit what you're saying, during his lifetime, he was seen as a great leader and often referred to. Now, of course, we can politically say, was he correct in his policies? Was he correct to really command that status? But I think it was widely agreed that he had the attributes of a leader to unite a cause, to unite his people, and to gain international recognition. Admittedly, not overnight. Clearly a contentious individual in his early career for many, many political reasons. But we're talking about greatness. So there's a good example of somebody who would be seen in that as a great leader.
Yes, I would agree with that he is seen as a great leader, and with good reason. And that what I would say about him, particularly Mandela, is he developed as a leader. And you would say that when he was first leading his civil rights movement in South Africa, he was quite strident and advocating violent means. And you could see how over the years he changed. Firstly, really for pragmatic reasons, to not wanting to use violent means. They weren't working.
No.
So you can say it was pragmatic, but it's like I was saying before, he's responding to the situation and coping with it. He's responding appropriately to the situation and bringing his followers with him. And so, I see that as showing great leadership. And the other thing that I said, in that in the end, if you're talking about a great leader, they have to be successful. They've got to be right in the end. Yes. And he was right. And so it's a cool and harsh world. We've got to say that if we're going to call you a great leader, you've got to get it right. Even though there was no, you may not have been blamed for getting it wrong. You've just got to get it right. There's no choice. Otherwise, we're not going to call you great. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes.
That's just, the epithet's not going to apply to you. So I would say he was a great leader because he got it right. He was successful in bringing a country out of a period of time where there was great inequality in the treatment of the citizens to a time when it's better. Of course, it is not a great situation still there now, but he did have a great effect on South Africa, and it could have been so much worse had he not been there. At the occasion, it could well have been a lot worse. So, I could say that, he shows the signs of being a great leader. What can we learn from that?
Yes.
I would say what we learned from his leadership style was that he was willing to learn.
Yes, and I think that was important because I also want to take a segue to a different tack here, which is actually about leadership of a nation. So, for example, we're talking about great leaders. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person. So I'll just explain this with a simple poem. And this poem is called Evaporated. Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the puddle. The fleet is now depleted, our defence is in a muddle. Tudors first reformed the Navy Royal, so Britons would be not slaves. Now Sir Francis Drake and Lord Nelson are turning in their graves. So the point being is
Yes.
Britain was once a great leader. I mean, a great leader in manufacturing, a great leader in conquering the world, both militarily, but of course bringing arts and language and culture. Well, where are we today? We're certainly not a leader. And there again, you see, what really does make great leaders? And I suppose you could say that, it's getting things right. We could argue that at one time Britain did get things right. Certainly did that during the Industrial Revolution. You can argue that it did so throughout the 19th and early 20th century. But of course things have changed quite dramatically. And yet I guess that you could then say, well, what other nations make great leaders? For example, might be seen as controversial, but is actually the United States of America now a great leader, i.e. a cause for democracy, where perhaps in some parts of the communities than the world that we're seeing today, where there is fraction, there is, infighting, there is threat, and yet in their own admission, they are arguing, should we be the police of the world? Should we be there to really lead people in this way? So looking at it at that sort of level, what was your opinion in terms of how nations can be leaders?
Well, I think nations can be leaders. We can see that nations, just from the way we think about them, appear to have personalities because, of course, they, as a nation, will make decisions. They'll have relationships. So they certainly can be leaders. They can show by the way that they behave, the way that they treat their citizens, that they're either good or bad, and they can be aspirational. You can want to be like them. You could think in terms of the Muslim world when Iraq changed to being a strict Muslim nation and Sharia law was imposed. It showed the way for other Muslim nations to follow suit. Now, we would say here on the Mark and Pete Show that Sharia law isn't the best way forward, but that's not the point I'm making here. Simply that the country was showing leadership to other countries. They wanted to follow suit. Now, the United States does show leadership, and over the years, people within other countries have tried to emulate it. So even if the actual leadership of another country is saying, no, we see the United States as a threat, or we see them as being tyrannical or showing hegemony and wanting to bully other countries, the people within the country want to follow the culture of the United States. And so you have it giving an example and showing leadership culturally, even if not politically. However, I would say that has changed over the years, certainly over the past, say, 50 years or so, 50, 60 years, since about the time of the Second World War, because it has become increasingly liberal, I suppose, would be the general term. Not liberal, perhaps I've got a better term, the sort of liberal agenda of wanting to have change social attitudes, to have disdain specifically for Christianity and belief in God, to have freedom of sexual expression, and they see this as being enlightened, and they've gone. I suppose what the term I'm really talking about is believing in progress. Yes. That ever since the Enlightenment, we've become very scientific, and all these freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of sexual expression, freedom, all this is following in a natural rolling pattern. We're becoming more liberal, more enlightened. Now, the rest of the world is not following that leadership. As we see the way other countries react to it, they either react with great bemusement. In general, the United States becomes just increasingly ignored because they're just seen as mad by people outside of the sort of Western liberal culture. And at an extreme level, actually, they just, people outside of the United States simply want to kill them. Yes. And so, I think that they have shown leadership in the past, but they no longer do, is what I'm saying, because of the change in their culture is now held with some disdain by many countries around the world.
Yes. The one thing I was going to say, and this might seem trivial, but the storyline and the message, I think, is quite powerful. And this is a fictional story, but it's a children's one, and it's something that I'm reminded on this subject about leaders, and it's about the Pied Piper. Now, for those who don't know what the story is about, it's quite simply about a character set in a hamlet where it's overtaken by rats, and quite simply, as most people will be familiar with the story, it became a problem. And in order to rid the hamlet of rats, they had a Pied Piper who was very good at playing on his pipe and luring away the rats. A great leader, you may say. Well, of course, if you do not treat a leader very well, and you don't pay him well and give him the respect, then it can have repercussions. Because in the story, and the moral of the story is, if you don't respect that leader, what actually happened in the story was, of course, he came to pay his vengeance and actually lured the children away. And unfortunately, the rats returned. So I guess the question there is that we should really sort of make sure that when we identify a good leader, that we recognize a good leader. So this is sort of bringing a conclusion to our story, that as we've come full circle now, here we are in the United Kingdom, and the government is about to be formed by Cameron, and he's going to march his way through the 2015 to 2020 term. I guess the question then is, will he lure the United Kingdom in the right direction, or will we be overrun by rats from foreign territories?
So he, of course, is saying he wants to make Great Britain great again. Which
of course,
is sort
exactly.
of which is a common pun. Of course, the great in Great Britain actually means bigger, larger
Yes.
territory. It doesn't mean great as in wonderful.
No.
It's often used in that
that's
way.
your opinion.
But he's saying that that's the case. So therefore, if he's going to lead in that way, he has the opportunity to show himself to be a great leader. Now, when he was in opposition, and so what that means in British political terms is when he was trying to become Prime Minister and opposing the current Prime Minister, he seemed to have no direction, no policies, and was simply saying whatever was popular to try and get voted in. And we have yet to see whether that's not the case, whether he's developed into a great leader. Let's hope and pray that he has.
Yes. So with that, listeners, we welcome your input about what makes a great leader. I mean, by all means, make a comment about whether you think David Cameron fits into that ilk, or whether you think that there are other people that are worth mentioning. We would love to hear from you. Drop us a line on www.markandpete.com, fill in the contact form, and just let us know. We want to really get your opinions on the show. So join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Mark and Pete.